Welcome to Science at FMNH, a podcast and video series that explores the behind-the-scenes science, collections, and research at Chicago's Field Museum. Does animal body size increase with colder temperatures? In this episode, we speak with Pete Makovicky and Nate Smith on how their research in Antarctica is helping to answer this question.
Looking at dinosaur growth is something that my advisor Pete Makovicky does a lot of, and we're actually interested in applying some of those techniques to the Antarctic vertebrates and starting to do histological work looking at their growth patterns as well.
The animals we find in Antarctica tend to be bigger than sort of their relatives on other continents from the same time period in the early Jurassic. There could be a number of explanations for this. One could be just pure chance. For whatever reason, fossilization in Antarctica trapped animals bigger than elsewhere. That seems extremely unlikely, and we can probably dismiss that fairly easily. But other more biological explanations could be that animals are known to be bigger in polar regions today. We see this sort of in body sizes of vertebrates, terrestrial vertebrate animals. It's an effect called Bergmann's rule, and it's possible that what we're seeing is the same thing operating in the Jurassic.
Glacialisaurus, this long-necked sauropodomorph, is maybe not the largest sauropodomorph from the early Jurassic, actually almost certainly not, but one of the largest among its set of very close relatives, which is interesting. It suggests that it, grew larger relative to its ancestors. The other animals that we find there as well, the Tritylodont. Now we only have a small tooth from that animal. That's a mammal-like reptile, kind of like a beaver on steroids almost. That animal actually, and one thing in mammals in general is that tooth size, particularly molars, they scale actually very well with body size. And even if we can't identify really good kind of scalar relationships between these things, teeth from its close relatives are much, much smaller than this animal. So right there, we've got the three animals that we're looking at, much, much larger than their close relatives in other parts of the world. This new ornithischian, depending on what it's related to, also seems, though it's a small dinosaur compared to Cryolophosaurus and Glacialisaurus, it might actually be a large ornithischian. It might be large relative to its ancestors and close relatives. But the fact that we're finding multiple vertebrates in Antarctica in the early Jurassic that are large-bodied compared to their close relatives hints at some, like an interesting pattern going on. How do dinosaurs actually attain these large body sizes? Is it because they're growing for longer periods of time? Is it because they're growing faster at certain periods of time in their ontogeny or their development? And so getting a lot of data from these histological sections can actually help tease those two different hypotheses apart. To say that they're large-bodied is a comparative statement. It's a comparative statement that implies knowledge about the evolutionary relationships of the animals. It implies that its ancestors or its close relatives were smaller-bodied than it was. It implies that this animal increased in size at some point during its evolutionary history. And so having those relationships as that kind of framework is what you need to kind of test and assess those patterns. Those trees, those family trees that we get, ultimately they come from the specimens themselves, the raw data, kind of real classic basic comparative anatomy and classical vertebrate paleontology work. And that's why natural history collections like the Field Museum are so important, because a lot of what has the biggest impact in paleontology, evolutionary biology, and sciences in general are these kind of big, higher-level hierarchical studies. But the building blocks of all these is always going to come back to the natural history data, the specimens themselves, and those need to be in a repository where they're cared for, and they need to be a place where researchers can come and use them and test them and available for other people to come and address those questions.